So today we're going to make hard cider with the Pico C. Of course, this will work with the Pico C, Pico Pro, Pico S, as long as all your software is updated, and you can do manual brewing. So what I did is I went on the website, and I'll talk while I'm getting this prepped, and I created a fake recipe. Basically, I called it hard cider, and I just chose some ingredients from the library just to allow it to make a program. And what I'm going to do is sync that program up with the Pico firm, because I'm going to use the Pico firm and the regular brew keg and so on to get this process started. So what I'm starting with is I'm just going to put in about a half cup of brown sugar. I mean, this is obviously your choice if you'd rather use brown sugar, white sugar, or no sugar. This will just help ensure that the OG is up high enough to get a decent alcohol content. And then I'm using some local cider. It was pressed about 3 days ago. It has no preservatives. It has not been pasteurized. So all we're doing with the Pico C is basically pasteurizing the cider before we do the fermentation. Now, there are sometimes preservatives, chemical preservatives. You don't want any chemical preservatives because then your cider won't ferment. So sometimes they use more natural preservatives, such as ascorbic acid or maltic acid, and that's fine. That won't be a problem, but you don't want chemical preservatives. And as far as pasteurization, if it's already pasteurized, you don't need to do any of this. If you want to use your Pico C to do your pasteurization, what I'm going to do is about 160 degrees for 10 minutes, and that should kill off probably 99.9% of anything that's in there. But I don't want to boil it. That'll basically set the pectins, and you just want to get it hot enough just to kill the majority of the yeast and bacteria that could be in there. So now I've got my brown sugar and my cider in the container, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into manual brew. I'm connecting my hoses together. With manual brew, you don't use the brew keg. We're just going to use that for fermentation and so on. So you connect the hoses together. Next, fill the step filter, which I've done with my cider and sugar. And insert the step filter, which I've done. And what I'm going to do is make sure I've got enough water in the reservoir for the steam generator, which produces the heat. Probably don't need a full 2 liters because I'm only going to heat this up for about 10 minutes. Start manual brew. So it's going to prime the steam generator, and then we'll get to the point where we can set our temperatures and times. So it should just take a minute here. What I'll do is I'll pause this and we will come back when it's done. Okay, that was a little faster than I expected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my target temp, which is going to be 160 degrees. And I'm going to set my hold time to 10 minutes. Very similar to manual brew steps. And I'm going to start step. And what this is going to do is it's going to start the heating up process. And once it gets up to 160 degrees, it'll circulate it for about 10 minutes. And that will dissolve all the sugar I've added. It'll bring the temperature up to 160 degrees and hopefully basically do a light pasteurization. So once that's done, I'll be back. So the brew cycle has completed. I'm now going to transfer the cider into the brew keg, which has been fully sanitized using Star San. With a typical brew cycle, you would be using the brew keg for beer, and it would be sanitized just by the heat. But because we're just going to transfer the 160 degree cider into the brew keg, I wanted to make sure it's fully sanitized. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sync my cider recipe with the Pico firm, and once the primary fermentation is complete, I'm going to use one of these stainless steel 5-liter kegs that I found on eBay. I got a couple of them for $30 each, And I'm going to use this for the secondary fermentation and for just basically the aging. And I purchased one of these pressure relief valves, so as this continues to do a little bit of fermentation in the secondary fermentation keg, it'll release that pressure. I'm not going to go through that whole procedure. That's pretty standard as far as manual brewing, but that concludes this video. This is a little supplement to the video. Basically, because I wasn't in a regular brew cycle, I didn't have an option to transfer from the step filter into the brew keg. So what I did is I ended up resetting the machine, or just turning it on, turning it off, turning it back on, went into the utilities and went to rack beer. And that's how I transferred it from the step filter into the brew keg. So that concludes the video. Thanks for watching.